King guide, king guide, king guide. Woo, woo, woo. All right. So this is going to be a little mundane for chat, sorry, but this is going to be mostly for YouTube. So, hi everybody. There's been a lack of king guides on YouTube. I know Lil Majin posted quite a few tips on doing king stuff. I know that there's been combo routes, but there hasn't really been a king guide. That's kind of where I want to enter the space and give some information. Being somebody who's consistently competed with king, I can kind of tell more or less the difference between strong kings and kings that are still struggling with just the basics. So, King is a very versatile character with a lot of damage and a lot of big moves. He doesn't really have poking tools because that's not really his archetype. He's a grappler. So naturally, doing stuff like big throws that net him a lot of damage is kind of his shtick. You kind of need to keep this in mind, as this is something that can end up being the deciding factor in matches, where if you're doing these big things, it's very easy to it's very easy to lose sight of that, right? So there's different ways in Tekken to at least avoid these things, like a throw, right? Like you can duck a throw. If I'm too far out, I can miss space a throw, and that leaves me open for realistically anything. As a king player, you want to make sure that doesn't happen. So in order to minimize that, we definitely want to do the simple stuff first. We want to make sure that what we're doing isn't leading to these crazy situations that might end up putting us at risk of losing the game. Which kind of starts the first point. Staying in a very close range. King really excels being really up close. He can do throws, he can do small pokes, he can basically do stuff that forces your opponent to respect this space. He has shove, which on counter hit gives him free damage. It's definitely a lot of like, you want to do these things so that you can set up something like a throw. Something like a very big damaging throw. To kind of complement that, he does have other moves that, in case your opponent starts ducking, you can kind of complement it with something like forward 3, which is a mid, down forward 1, which isn't super damaging, but it gets them to respect your neutral, basically. You can't take these all day in anticipation of a duck, because all of a sudden your health just starts deteriorating. And the second you start holding back, you start throwing them again. It's kind of like the Kazuya, the Kazuya Devil Jin mindset of, you want to be aware of the hell sweep, but you kind of also need to be aware of like the counterplay to a hell sweep, right? You either mash, you either space yourself correctly and step. For King, it's throwing. You want to make sure your opponent isn't ducking, isn't blocking, or isn't ducking or spacing themselves away from you so that you can't do these things. So for you as the king player, being comfortable in this range 0 to range 1-ish, is probably the most effective for king. I see a lot of king players chilling out back here, which is okay sometimes because he does have back 3, but even back 3 does not reach this far. It's pretty opposite of what king wants to be doing, so definitely be comfortable chilling here. Because you're in this space, you have to also be aware of your defense, which is also something that a lot of king players struggle with. It's just having a really good defense. Being a king player, he has a lot of defensive tools, specifically the one I just mentioned, back 3. This is an armor move in this game, which means we can just let it rock sometimes. This move is -10 on block, but if it gets absorbed, it's completely safe. So I'm just going to have the opponent do... we'll do forward 4. Right, so something small as doing down forward 1 into back 3 can kind of prove useful. right? These situations are basically really good situations for King to use this move. Just, I know, cut it out. Yeah, it's okay. It's a really good move to just kind of use as a defensive tool for King. That being said, it's not something you want to rely on, because King's move is a high, and it does have its caveats, right? It's just something a little bit risky to do as a defensive tool. He also has Shove, which is really, really good on counter hit, and forces your opponent to kind of respect you doing the things that you're trying to do. It's 10 frames, which is about as fast as a jab, and it's just really good. It controls the space pretty well. If you see me in my streams or me playing against anybody, I'm always doing Shove. I would suggest you using Shove as well. His other tools, like down forward 2, down forward 1, are also really good, specifically just to counter hit your opponent and just to control the spacing. Down forward 1 in this game is not what it was in Tekken 7, so it is a little bit more harder to get away from opponents with this and to hit opponents from afar, but you can kind of play with it and create situations with it. Down forward 2 is mostly a counter hit launching tool. It's also a good mid poke, but it's not something that you want to stay committed to. As you can see in the bottom right corner, where chat was, this move is -6 on block. This kind of doesn't put us in a good way, and it's 13 frames, which is really good, but being -6, I can't be doing this all day, otherwise I'll get counter hit. So that's something to kind of consider. I know a lot of people are like, down forward 2 is really strong, but you can't abuse it as much as you can with something like down forward 1, where it's -1 versus this being -6 on block. It's pretty hard to control the spacing if your opponent is just consistently blocking and forcing you to give up your turn with something like down forward 2. That being said, if your opponent is blocking and they are playing defensive, he has back 1-2. Wow, that's crazy. He has back 1-2, and if you think your opponent's going to swing on you, counter hit launch. It's a really good tool, but at the same time, like the Power Crush, you want to use it pretty sparingly. This move is -8 on block. It's not the safest move in the world. You do not want to be using this all day, every day. This is like you call them out kind of. Like, you want to call them out for mashing after doing stuff like this, right? You want to do like a small poke, they mash afterwards, test them with back 1. Same thing with down forward 2. After down forward 1, maybe try and do down forward 2 and catch them mashing. There's kind of like this give and take with King's Neutral. You either give up your advantage to gain space, or you give up your spacing for damage. When I kind of say that, this is kind of me giving up my space in order to be looking for damage. Something like forward neutral 2, I intentionally want to be out in this area because it tracks. I'm sorry, it doesn't track. It has good spacing, right? It can dominate a pretty effective range, right? I could use this up close, but this move is 18 frames fast, I guess, which is pretty slow, and I can get counter hit out of this. It does have high evading properties, but essentially this is kind of like my get in tool, right? I want to get, if I'm back here, my opponent is just kind of blocking and defending a lot and really willing to test the spacing. I do want to be doing something like this where I can enter their effective range, and if they try to hit me out of it, they might get counter hit. Similarly, something like the opposite, where if my opponent is really just trying to aggress and enter the space, forward neutral 1+2 also works, as well as back 3 as a Whiff Punisher. Back 3 is really good as a Whiff Punisher, especially for how long of a reach it has, and it does a lot of damage and gets you really good positioning. It gives a lot for what it does. In a similar fashion, that's how forward 1 kind of works. Specifically with forward neutral 2, these two can kind of be conjoined just because of the range that they both have. This is mostly for if you're struggling to get into your opponent's effective range, they keep pushing every time you approach. You could do something like this. Do be mindful of the spacing though, because one backdash is really all it takes to get this move to whiff. So if I just have the opponent backdash, right? They'll do a standing block into a backdash. Actually, I can do this. Yeah, we'll do something like that, right? It's pretty hard for me to try and continue the pressure if, like, the opponent keeps trying to back away and they're creating space, and eventually the move just starts whiffing. Which is why it's important to stay in this comfortable range, right? Your goal is to stay here. If you can't default to back here, look for whiff punishes. Look for a move that can get you into the space and keep you in the space. To kind of circle back to the beginning with the throws get him a lot of damage, but we shouldn't ignore the other tools that he has, like down forward 2 and down forward 1 and forward neutral 2, forward 1, back 3. These are all really good tools that really encapsulate King's game plan. King wants to throw. That's kind of the big point, right? They gave him these tools to set him up for throws. A lot of King players will start off the game immediately grabbing. This is not really the best way to go about it, because you kind of need to be aware that your opponent also probably knows this. Your opponent is probably aware that this is a King player. He's probably going to try to grab me. I'm going to duck a lot. If the second we start the round, we start to grab, that automatically shows your hand in what you're trying to do over the span of about 3 to 6 games, right? Every match of Tekken is about 3 rounds, depending on how quickly those games go. And if you lose 1, lose 2, now it's 6 games. It is very quick to shut down somebody whose game plan is just throwing. Versus somebody who isn't throwing and is doing these quick small moves, all of a sudden the damage that you're supposed to be making with throws starts netting up from damage that you usually get, again, from throws with small pokes. And now your opponent is not so much worried about the throws, they're worried about you chipping them away with these tools. So as a King player, you kind of have to strategize a little, right? A lot of people are like, oh, King is just unga bunga, you could just do whatever you want. Sometimes yes, but generally speaking, if you strategize this correctly, you force them into this checkmate situation, right? You do enough pokes to where you get your opponent to start respecting these pokes, and now they're forced to hold back. So at this point, the second they start holding back is when you start going in. That is where the strategy starts coming into play. These small pokes lead up to these grab situations that your opponent just kind of has to hold because they were getting gripped up without getting grabbed. So now it's a matter of, okay, I showed my hand a little bit. How much can I press that? Right? How willing is my opponent gonna be in... Let me rephrase that. How willing is my opponent going to accept all of these damaging pokes and small tools? And if they are, can I keep going with it? Right? Your goal is to grab and make up damage with the grabs, but if you don't have to, you don't need to. Your grabs are complements to this game plan. If you're winning off of lows, off of down forward 1s, down forward 2s, why would you go for a grab and give up that pressure? You know? Make it simple. Keep it simple. There's no need to go extra and do all these crazy things like down forward 1 into chain grab if you haven't set that up at all the entire game. And if you're winning with just these grabs, or with these normal tools. The grabs are really cool. They're very fun to do, I agree. It's very, very easy to get into the grab head mind space. But the important part is focusing more on establishing your area of effectiveness, which is around range 0 to range 1, and being able to play around that enough to set up a grab. We can't just bypass that first part, because if we bypass it altogether, your opponent's going to be ducking all day, your opponent's going to be spacing you out all day, it's going to be a bitch and a half to try and, you know, figure out, oh, is this, you know, am I close enough to throw him? Is he going to swing if I throw? And that's a lot of stress that you have to deal with as king, where you just don't need to deal with it sometimes. You can just do down forward 2 all day. You can do down forward 1 into down forward 2. You can do these small little pokes that just start adding up damage that then leads to these guaranteed throw situations. To kind of bring into the light also, King's jabs are really good. They're not the best, but they also help you in figuring out your spacing. If your jabs aren't hitting, your grabs aren't going to be hitting either, generally speaking. So, kind of be aware of that. If my jabs aren't going to hit, why would I expect my grabs to hit? If you're not within jab range, you should not be grabbing. That's kind of a good thing to think about. If you are not in jab range, you should not be trying to grab. And doing a jab is so much safer because there's a lot of recovery here for King, where if he just kind of does a throw, let me go ahead and set up King to do a throw here. If he's doing a throw, he's pretty open for a long time. I don't know if you can see that punish thing down there on the bottom right. It lights up when that happens. That is well after the fact that I already threw. I can delay that so long. This is such a punishable thing on Whiff, whereas something as small as a jab is just not, you can't punish this. This move is not punishable. If I whiff the jab, excuse me, if I whiff the jab, compared to the throw, it's a punish after that, but if they start, you know, if they just back off a little bit, all of a sudden, it's not as punishable as a throw. So I can't do what I was doing if I'm just trying to throw all day. This is considered a punish. This is, he's out there for a minute, you know? Doing the safer things, making sure that your spacing is correct with the jab really helps you put into perspective, like, am I really spacing things correctly? Should I be jabbing here? Should I be doing a throw here? And having that in mind really helps you want to stay in this space. It really makes things so much more easy for you to navigate your gameplay in a more brawling centered fashion versus chilling back here and relying on running in and doing the grab. The strongest kings that I play against are definitely the ones that have strong defense and the ones that are willing to swing up close. And it's definitely not the ones who are sitting back here doing stuff like this, trying to throw at every chance they get, because it's just super easy to find a break in their offense and launch them for it. As a king player, you want to make sure that this offense, this defense makes sense being a king main, a grappler, because that's where his damage usually comes from. He's not a poke character like Brian, who has long-range pokes, who can dominate the mid-range. He's not like June, who can do these crazy pokes from afar and not have to worry about getting counter hit or, you know, staying up close because she has plus frame moves. King doesn't have a lot of plus frame moves. His fast ones are minus. A lot of his fast moves are really minus. -6, -8. Oops. -8. These moves don't give him advantage on block. So it's up to the king player to really decide what's worth it. Staying up close and doing these small things, or continually going for these big moves that lead me to really, really disadvantaged situations and not allowing me to set up a grab. That's why it's so important to do these small things, because I can still move around and play around effectively, whereas if I'm constantly doing something like forward 4, I'm risking the space. I'm risking not only the space, but my advantage afterwards. Because, like, I'm -9 with pushback here. Forward 1, I'm -5 with pushback here. It's taking me out of my effective range, and I don't have advantage against my opponent. If I swing, I die. Something like a jab on block, +1. Super fast, super quick. I can engage with the opponent, keep up with them, and not have to worry about losing my range, as well as my advantage generally. Same thing with down forward 1. It's only -1, but it helps control the spacing a bit better. Down forward 2, not so much. -6. But that's mostly a poke tool. Things to be aware of. His lows don't do the most damage, and they also don't give a lot of advantage. So I would definitely stick with forward neutral 2. Being -13 has been an incredible buff for King. If you want to try and poke your opponent, definitely use forward neutral 2. I think that just about covers what to how to go about playing against an opponent with King. He's definitely I think he's definitely a good, strong character, especially with counter hit throws. But you don't want to rely on throws. You want to use throws to complement your gameplay, and if your gameplay is defensive, if your gameplay is really tight, up close, it just makes the game so much easier to pressure your opponent by just being up close. It also helps being in this close range because you'll see these gaps in your opponent's defense very quickly. It helps you generally play the game so much easier with less issues playing against somebody who might just be super tight on defense or super smashy on defense. Versus if you constantly throw them, you'll never know what their tendencies are. That being said, I think that's about it for the King guide. I'm going to do the King anti-King guide after this, so let me know how this was. I know this wasn't really like a King tool thing, this is more like a strategy for King, so if this helps you get out of certain ranks, by all means, please let me know. This is definitely something that really has been, I think, the downfall of a lot of good King players, and just King players generally. So, let me know what you guys think. Thanks for sticking around for as long as this was, and I hope to see you in a stream sometime. Yeah, thanks.